Desert Immigrants by Mario T. Garcia, Chapter 9. Border Revolution. If American local politics provoked little interest among Mexican immigrants, the politics of the Mexican Revolution of 1910, by contrast, captured their attention. Because immigrants saw Mexico, not the United States, as their homeland. The Civil War aroused their nationalism as well as their personal concerns for family and friends left behind. Moreover, since they saw their eventual return to Mexico as the basis of a better life, Mexicans along the border avidly followed political events in Mexico that might affect their future plans. Indeed, all of El Paso became involved in the revolution. When the El Paso Ciudad Juarez area proved to be perhaps the most strategic site for all revolutionary factions. Because of its location, El Paso was a logical haven for political exiles, many of whom received support from the city's large Mexican community. By 1907, depressed economic conditions, especially in Juarez, also created fertile ground for revolutionary activity. Most important, the Pass of the North was a major supplier of armaments and munitions. Consequently, El Paso and its sister city, Ciudad Juarez, provided the stage for the acting out of varied revolutionary movements. As early as 1893, increased reports of rebellion against Porfirio Diaz's dictatorial government reached El Paso. Organized in northern Mexico and along the U.S.-Mexican border, such initial but small-scale efforts stressed Diaz's totalitarian rule and the need to implement the democratic principles of Mexico's Constitution of 1857. At first considering these actions merely an outbreak of banditry, the Times admitted in late 1893 that insurrection indeed existed in Mexico. Recent disturbances, it pointed out, in state of Guerrero and the disorders within the state of Durango, as well as the frontier troubles the Chihuahua and the threatening conditions of Coahuila, are the smoke of a revolutionary fire that has been long smoldering the hearts of many Mexicans who believe that Diaz's government is perpetuated tyranny, daily restricting their liberty and selling their country, unquote. 2 days later, the Times added that a Mexican rebel by the name of Lujan, upon arriving in El Paso from Chihuahua, had gone to the lower valley settlement of San Elorizo, Azario, where he had taken command of 65 armed Mexicans. Lujan's intentions were to recross the border along the line of the Mexican Central and engage Mexican federal troops. As a result of growing rebel activity, Juarez officials announced the expected arrival of 300 federales to help prevent a possible attack on the Mexican border town. Concurring with the Times report, although discounting a successful rebellion, sorry about that, 300 federales to help possible attack on the Mexican border town. Concurring with the Times report, although discounting a successful rebellion against Diaz, the U.S. consul in Juarez informed the State Department of Mexican insurrections in western Chihuahua led by Santana Perez, who the consul believed had from 65 to 300 men. American authorities, concerned about violations of Mexican states' neutrality laws and pressured by the Mexican government, began investigating and detention of suspected Mexican rebels on the northern side of the frontier. In El Paso, they focused on the activities of Victor La Ochoa and Lauro Aguirre, first apprehended toward the end of 1893. Ochoa was accused by officers of employing and equipping insurgents in El Paso and sending them into Mexico to fight government forces. Ochoa's arrest, the Times noted, plainly showed that American government's anxiety. However, a few weeks later, the U.S. consul in Juarez reported that Ochoa, apparently acquitted of all charges, along with other rebels, had impressed 10 Mexican cowboys into their ranks 120 miles southeast of Juarez. When rumors reached to El Paso of Ochoa's return to the border, despite some reports of his death, Mexican Secret Service men swarmed around the rebel's house in Chihuahua, where his wife still resided. Mrs. Ochoa, who is just now in the deepest grief, the Times commented on the Mexican spy's noticeable presence, was not only greatly annoyed by, but frightened out of her wits, unquote. The newspaper believed Ochoa to be dead, but if alive, did not consider him to be foolish enough to reappear in his El Paso home. In fact, quite alive, Ochoa, writing to the editor of the Albuquerque Citizen, announced that notwithstanding the loss of 43 of his men in a recent battle, he would continue to fight against the usurpers of the right of the people. I am neither dead nor wounded, and much less frightened, unquote, Ochoa defiantly stressed. To win, we must use tricks, but I have the hope and the day will yet come when our cause will triumph, unquote. Ochoa's struggle ended, however, when Texas Rangers, along with federal officials, captured him in Pecos County, southeast of El Paso, on charges of organizing an armed force on American territory with the intent of invading in Mexico. When he was returned to El Paso for trial, a large crowd, presumably of Mexicans, greeted the apprehended but popular revolutionary. A federal court subsequently convicted Ochoa of violating American neutrality laws and sentenced him to 3 years in prison. After Ochoa, federal investigators closely watched Lauro Aguia, a Chihuahua civil engineer by profession. Aguia had actively participated in anti-Diaz's protests in 1895. As a result, Mexican officials accused Aguia, along with the Teresa Urrea, a woman believed to possess healing powers, of attempting to influence Yaqui Indians in Sonora to rebel. Politically harassed, Aguia crossed the border and briefly resided in Nogales, Arizona, where he published El Independiente, an anti-Diaz newspaper. He arrived in El Paso shortly thereafter and carried on his work against the Diaz regime. In March 1896, the United States government, without a warrant, arrested Aguia in his Chihuahua home, along with fellow journalist Flores Chapa, on a charge by the Mexican consul that both men had plans to enter Mexico and engage in revolution. The U.S. consul in Juarez investigated the incident and informed Washington that he believed Aguia and Chapa innocent of the charges. On the contrary, they came to El Paso, Texas, for the purpose of gaining a livelihood by publishing their newspaper in the Spanish language under the name of El Independiente. At his trial, Aguia admitted printing anti-Diaz articles but denied any revolutionary acts. Quote, I am publishing a paper against Mexico, he told the court, because I hope to remedy the evils by pointing out what they will lead to, unquote. He further acknowledged, writing, that in his opinion, a revolutionary process had begun in Mexico. Yet his lawyer, W.H. Burgess, emphasized that such statements did not constitute evidence of overt revolutionary activity. If the court found his client guilty, Burgess concluded, then every American newspaper carrying news of rebellion south of the border should also be declared guilty. The federal court agreed and found both Aguia and Chapa innocent. Aguia's persistent and bold attacks on Diaz's infuriated Mexican authorities, who charged the journalist, along with Teresa Urrea, known to her followers as Santa Teresa, a fomenting revolution along the border. In 1901, the mayor of Juarez complained to the U.S. consul of subversive statements, attributed to Aguirre, and in his newspaper, now called El Progresista. Sorry if I mispronounce. According to the Juarez official, Aguirre had misrepresented facts and had made passionate appeals against the Mexican government. 1 year later, informed of a Diaz plot to kidnap him, Aguirre wrote President Roosevelt asking for American protection. Quote, "I respectfully request you to issue orders to protect against such assaults," unquote. The Mexican editor appealed to the American head of state. "I am a political refugee and ask for the protection of the United States flag," unquote. Instructed by Washington to examine Aguirre's case, U.S. Consul Charles W. Kendrick in Juarez concluded that no kidnap scheme existed except in the newspaper's mind. Aguirre remained in El Paso, where he soon joined the most radical movement against Diaz, the revolt of Ricardo Flores Magón, and the Partido Liberal Mexicano, the PLM. Flores Magón's anarcho-syndicalist rebellion expressed the growing discontent among many Mexican intellectuals, as well as the middle class, over Diaz's refusal to broaden political decision-making in Mexico. Composed mainly of professionals. Sorry about that. Composed mainly of professionals and forced to leave Mexico in 1904 due to their criticisms of the government, Flores Magón and the leaders of the PLM planned a revolution in San Antonio and St. Louis, where they evaded the Mexican Secret Service and published their newspaper Regeneración. Although holding to socialist and anarchist beliefs, the PLM essentially called for establishment of the bourgeois democratic principles in Mexico, which it believed could be accomplished only through armed revolution. The Magonistas hoped to stimulate a spontaneous mass uprising in Mexico by their capture in Ciudad Juarez in 1906. The PLM prepared for its attack on the key Mexican border town by organizing in El Paso a cell known as the Club Liberal, involving Mexicans from both sides of the border. It took orders from Lauro Aguirre, who served as the organization's president, and another journalist, W. Tovar E. Bueno, its vice president. And El Paso PLM members such as Juan Sarabia and Antonio I Valeur also traveled into Chihuahua, where they coordinated plans with supporters and disseminated Magonista propaganda, including Aguirre's latest newspaper. La Reforma Social. Flores Magón arrived in El Paso as preparations for the assault reached their final stages. To direct the rebellion from the home of PLM member Modesto Diaz in Chihuahua, crowded with Mexican immigrants, the rebels lived on South Oregon and South El Paso streets, and considered El Paso's Mexican district a safe haven for their operations. Besides valuing its advantageous proximity to the international bridges in the railroad station, expecting to recruit 200 armed men on the American side, the PLM's objectives involved crossing into Juarez and blowing up the Federal Army garrison, the police station, and the prefect's headquarters. The Magonistas would then send a contingent by train to capture Ciudad Chihuahua, which they believed would lead to the collapse of the Diaz regime throughout the northern states and the beginning of its demise in Mexico. Unfortunately, the PLM had not counted on its plans being discovered by Diaz informers. who had successfully infiltrated the revolutionary cells in both border towns. Before Flores Magón and his followers could complete their strategy, El Paso police and federal officers acting in concert with the Mexican consul raided several homes known as rebel hideouts. Most PLM members learned of the searches just in time and escaped, including Flores Magón, who left El Paso by train for Los Angeles. Those arrested included key Magonistas lieutenants Agui Villarreal and Romula Carmona. Sorry if I mispronounced. Officials also captured numerous documents linking the El Paso cell with others in Laredo, Brownsville, Eagle Pass, Del Rio, St. Louis, and Douglas, Arizona. Such evidence the arresting officers believed would be sufficient either to deport the Mexicans or to hold them on charges of violating neutrality laws. At the same time, Juarez police apprehended 13 known PLM members and Chihuahua authorities detained more than 100 people alleged to be Magonista adherents. Its revolutionary plans thwarted. PLM leaders found themselves either arrested or in hiding by the end of 1906. Undaunted despite their constant harassment in the United States by both American and Mexican authorities, the PLM attempted a second attack on Juarez 2 years later. His brother, confined in a Los Angeles jail, Enrique Flores Magón, directed the plot from an El Paso house on the corner of the 1st and Tays near the border. Besides the raid on Juarez, the Magonistas planned assaults on several other Mexican towns on the Texas-Mexican frontier. However, seemingly possessed of nothing but the bad luck in El Paso, the PLM strategy became known to border officials. An American barber living next door to the secret rebel headquarters reported strangers, at times armed, coming and going at all times of the night. Investigating what they believed to be a possible smuggling ring, police officers raided the house and, to their surprise, uncovered 9 Winchester rifles, almost 1,000 rounds of ammunition, 5 revolvers, bombs made out of cans filled with powder and fragments of iron, and documents revealing the PLM's identity. Officials arrested 11 Mexicans suspected of being Magonistas, including the 4 occupants of the house. After Loreo Aguirre published a special edition of La Reforma Social charging the police with an illegal search, authorities also seized the editor. Aguirre, claiming to be an American citizen, denied any involvement with the revolutionary scheme. While in my paper, I have always fought the Mexican government, he insisted. I have always fought from the front, and as a citizen of the United States, I am guaranteed the right under the Constitution to voice my opinion and protest what I consider tyranny in any part of the world. Their El Paso plans discovered the PLM saw their additional attacks along the borders likewise fail. Of the Mexicans arrested and tried, the court convicted and sentenced P.G. Silva and L.V. Trevino to 2 years at Fort Leavenworth for violations of neutrality laws. The court proceedings aroused much interest among El Paso's Mexican population, and many avidly attended the deliberations. Limited in followers, poorly equipped, were pressed by officials, and unrealistically expecting a spontaneous mass uprising in Mexico. The PLM did not actively participate again in El Paso revolutionary politics after 1908. Where Flores Magón's movement failed, that of Francisco Madero succeeded beyond the expectations of most El Pasoans. A wealthy landowner from Cajia in northern Mexico, Madero basically objected to Diaz's willingness to retire voluntarily from office and allow open elections. Don Porfirio, after suggesting that he would not stand for re-election in 1910, changed his mind and announced for still another term. In an editorial, the Times commented that although it had never doubted the Mexican president's desire to remain in office, it did not agree with those who contended that no one could ever effectively replace Diaz. The Mexican people, according to the Times, had politically matured and had accepted a peaceful transfer of power. Mexico had passed the silly, quote, silly revolutionary stage, unquote. The El Paso paper asserted that Diaz could now retire without endangering the peace and progress of his country. The Times admitted political unrest in Mexico, but emphasized that foreign investors south of the border would never allow a revolution that would endanger their interests. Assured of Diaz's ability to maintain the peace so essential for foreign capital, the Times, along with many El Pasoans, both American and Mexican, welcomed the Mexican strongman to the border city for his celebrated visit with President Taft on October 16, 1909. Quote, "The people of El Paso welcome you to our midst." Mayor Joseph Sweeney proclaimed to Diaz, "Greeting not you alone, but the people of Mexico whose representative you are, and in voicing that welcome, we but re-echo that of all our countrymen." The Times' assessment of Diaz's strength proved inaccurate in that it underestimated Mexico's economic and political crisis. After being prevented by Diaz from effectively challenging for presidency in 1910, Madero issued from his exiled San Antonio headquarters a revolutionary call to arms, the Plan de San Luis Potosí. Madero demanded political reforms and the revitalization of the 1857 Constitution, and his movement quickly gained notoriety, especially along the border, with supporters in Chihuahua and Sonora such as Francisco Pancho Villa, Abraham Gonzalez, and Pascal Orozco. The Maderistas engaged Diaz's troops in early skirmishes. By November, the Revolutionary of 1910, Mexico's most tragic civil war, had commenced. In Juarez, the chief of police, fearful of an insurrecto attack, recruited several hundred special officers to protect the town. In addition, Mexican customs guards patrolled the riverfront to prevent any rebels from entering through El Paso. Authorities also arrested 40 Mexicans on suspicion of being revolutionaries, not to be left out. El Paso shared in the excitement. Thousands of Mexicans on the American side of the border flocked to the riverbank near the smelter to better observe the expected battle, only to be disappointed when it failed to take place. Madero arrived in El Paso a few months after the revolution. After his revolutionary proclamation to meet with his local junta, but quickly fled when informed that U.S. authorities sought his apprehension for violation of the neutrality laws. As a result, the apostle of democracy entered Chihuahua, southeast of El Paso at Zaragoza, and took formal command of his forces. However, El Paso remained a strategic location for the Maderistas, who announced early in 1911 that the Texas border city would be their central headquarters in the United States, maintaining an office and at the Planters Hotel at 110 Half South Oregon, and later in the Caples building in downtown El Paso. Madero's men dispatch agents to Denver, Oakland, Kansas City, and Chicago, as well as other places, in search of recruits, arms, and financial support. The Times accurately interpreted the establishment of the El Paso junta. Quote, "This information is taken to indicate that Madero expects to confine his operations in northern Mexico to the cities south of Juarez and to the south of Sonora. For some time to come, the Maderists found support and sympathy from different sectors of the El Paso community, including many Mexican political exiles, immigrant workers, some Mexican Americans, and various Americans who profited by selling arms and supplies to the rebel forces. Among the exiles, the socialist and ex PLM member El Gutierrez de Lara was the most effective propagandist for the revolutionary cause. Arrested numerous times in Mexico for his opposition to Diaz, Gutierrez de Lara had gained attention in the United States by having assisted the American journalist John Kenneth Turner in his investigative reporting, which exposed the horrid labor conditions under Diaz, especially in the rural areas. By 1910, Gutierrez de Lara traveled along the border, calling for the overthrow of Diaz and gathering adherents for Madero, Mexican socialist, to deliver a lecture. The Times noted of Gutierrez by de Lara's arrival in El Paso for a series of speeches in early 1911. His first lecture, delivered from the county courthouse steps, attracted about 700 people, mostly Mexicans, who repeatedly interrupted him with shouts of Viva Mexico and much applause when he referred to the revolution against Diaz. 600 Mexicans turned out the following day and heard Gutierrez de Lara speak on the origin of revolution in the origin of revolution in Latin America at the corner of Overland and El Paso streets adjacent to Chihuahua, possibly attracted by the festival excitement of a mass rally, as well as the revolutionary polemics. An additional 2,000 Mexicans listened to the socialist at his next two street corner orations. Quote, "The time will come," he predicted, at one gathering, when the land will be divided among the whole people of the nation. And when this division is made, they, the Mexican workers, will live the life of the millionaires of today. Gutierrez de Lara also collected funds for Madero's field hospitals by selling political literature to his audiences. After a short excursion into Chihuahua, where he fought with the Maderistas, Gutierrez de Lara returned to El Paso and attempted to organize a mass parade as a show of support for Madero. Unable to acquire a permit for the march, when city officials, fearing a violation of neutrality statutes, refused his request, Gutierrez de Lara nevertheless challenged the American authorities. After speaking to an evening rally attended by approximately 3,000 persons, composed almost entirely of Mexicans, Gutierrez de Lara urged the crowd to follow him through the downtown streets. Before the march he could even commence, however, city police descended on the Mexicans and escorted Gutierrez de Lara to the city jail. An angered audience pursued the police and demanded the socialist release. Throughout the evening, a reporter observed mounted officers had to clear out the streets to prevent the Mexicans from gaining access to the police station. At one point, more than 200 Mexican women approached the city jail and insisted that Gutierrez de Lara be given his liberty. Except for some rock throwing, the Times noted that the irritated Mexicans remained peaceful throughout their vigil. By midnight, as the streetlights went off, the Mexicans, unable to free their dynamic orator, went home. Besides Gutierrez de Lara, El Paso police apprehended 13 of his supporters for disturbing the peace. Members of Madero's junta in the border city, apparently embarrassed by what appears to have been Gutierrez de Lara's independent action, denounced the socialists and stressed that they had not sponsored the rally and proposed march. At a hearing attended by numerous Mexicans, the court found Gutierrez and De Laura guilty of obstructing street and impeding traffic and fined him $25.20. Mexicans in El Paso assisted the revolutionary movement in other ways besides participating in pro-Maduro rallies. One study of the revolution in the El Paso Ciudad Juarez area suggests that by 1910, many unemployed Mexican immigrant workers returning to the border enlisted Maduro's army. Some with jobs and unable to leave, but who sympathized with rebels, provided money. Mexican smelter workers, for example, took up a collection that they donated to the insurrectos. Still others contributed in a less orthodox fashion. Mexican insurrecto sympathizers, the Times reported, were yesterday stopped from throwing dollars and donuts across the river from the American side to the insurrectos camped opposite of the El Paso smelting works. More prominent Mexicans, including exiles and possibly Mexican Americans, helped the cause by holding fundraisers for the rebel hospital in Chihuahua under the direction of the American Dr. I.J. Bush. To purchase needed medical equipment for Bush, a number of young Mexican señoritas hosted a camadas, a Mexican fair, and dance at La Protectora Lodge at the corner of 5th and Stanton. Sponsoring lunches at a hall, older Mexican women aided the hospital as well as the Red Cross by collecting on one occasion close to $200. A Mexican women's organization at the Cinco de Febrero chose to help relatives of dead or wounded revolutionaries by holding a bazaar at Washington Park in East El Paso, where they collected several $100s. The same society held a grand ball in honor of Mathilde's mother and wife, quote, the best element of local Mexican colony, the Times observed, will turn out in force to express their sympathy for the insurrectos and to do a special honor to the mother and wife of the man who has sacrificed everything to give personal liberty to the people of Mexico, unquote. Finally, when Maduro's army arrived on the outskirts of Juarez, a large crowd of El Paso Mexicans, including a Mexican band conducted by Trinidad Concha, crossed the river and to welcome and serenade the Maderistas. On May 8, 1911, 2 weeks after the arrival on the border, the insurrectos began their attack on Juarez. 2 days later, with the Federales suffering heavy casualties, the strategic border town fell, and a jubilant Madero proclaimed Juarez the provisional capital of Mexico. Stunned by Maduro's victory, Porfirio Diaz resigned within days of the battle and abandoned Mexico for exile in Paris. In El Paso, thousands of people had fought for vantage points near the border and on top of business buildings to view the fighting. I watched the battle from the top of then Sheldon Hotel, recalls Charles Armijo. I took my field glasses and I watched them fight over there, unquote. Unfortunately, stray bullets caused mishaps, such as deaths of Jose Lorenzo, an expressman near the El Paso pump station. Several other Mexicans living near the border also suffered death or injuries because of the conflict. According to the Times, 20-year-old Vicente Paredes had been killed by a, quote, wild bullet while reading a paper at his home on the corner of Santa Fe and 5th Street. Another shot hit an 11-year-old Mexican girl in the head, slightly injuring her. Mrs. Jose Garcia, who lived 2 blocks north of the Santa Fe Bridge, sustained a neck wound. In addition, the injured from Juarez filled the rebel hospital in El Paso. When the fighting subsided, both towns joined in celebrating Maduro's great triumph. 10,000 Mexicans, including including several hundred Mexican Americans, accompanied by the brass band, crossed the border one evening and paid tribute to the Maderistas. In turn, many of the Madero's officers shopped and dined in El Paso. Colonel Francesco Villa made his appearance in the Sheldon Hotel lobby yesterday afternoon about 3 o'clock. Quote, a reporter commented, and after walking about for several minutes, entered the cafe where he ordered lunch. Sorry, my legs get locked. Ordered lunch. Okay. Yet Villa had other things on his mind than a